All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the ETVT podcast, where you know we're all about perception. I have an incredibly special guest today. You have actually heard her name in my first book review, Miss Aurora Ascher. How are you doing there, ma'am?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure to have you on here because it's always great to have a creator, an artist, especially one who has found success in their craft. And before we get into the first question, and you sharing your amazing perception on life, I do just want to make it known that you have a very humble upbringing, a very creative upbringing. And correct me if I say anything wrong, but you were an avid reader at a young age, and then you had a break. I know that you were a classic pianist, and you have
Mhm.
had these different experiences that have basically, to cut a long story short, led to where you are now. So I would like to get some of the meat and potatoes from all that experience from you. And I'm going to start with a very broad question. And that is, how do you feel and what is your perception and the way you interpret the idea of living a creative life as a person that's in a very business, capitalistic, whatever is going on in the world today? What does this creative life mean to you? And how does all this work?
I think it was kind of, I don't know if I'm just wired this way or it had something to do with my upbringing, but I kind of feel like for me, it was the only choice from the beginning. As soon as I could think for myself, like in high school, I was like so determined to just like get the hell out of my hometown and I was never really good at like working for other people and like menial jobs that you just have to pay the bills or whatever. I always really did not thrive in those types of environments. I don't take orders well from other people. And I've always been really creative growing up. I was always into art and music and all the things. So I think for me, it was kind of like a matter of like, how do I make my life, how do I tailor my life to meet these sort of, this is the way I am already kind of. It was like never really an option for me to do anything else, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I understand what you're saying. While I can't say I personally understand, which is the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
So when you started realizing this in high school, and this is very interesting, um, from then to where you are now, a New York Times bestseller. And by the way, I should note that your genre is fantasy and paranormal romance. I have learned a new word looking up interviews from you, and that's smut. I might I might need a better explanation, but I think from the context, I know what it is. But how intimidating was it to like as a young individual who's trying to find a way in this crazy complex society? Um, like, were you ever intimidated by the thought of being able to live on your own terms in your own way and even make a living monetarily off of your art?
Yeah, definitely. I think it takes a lot. There's a lot of, I feel like we're constantly being bombarded by messages that are telling us that we're not enough. And yeah, there's lots of success out there, but it's just for a few special people. And you're probably not one of those people because you're just average. And I think too, like, just to like slip in a little feminism there too. I think as a woman as well, my parents were very like traditional and being raised in that kind of household, it was like there were a lot of life skills that I wasn't taught. And it was just kind of like I was set up to be like pretty average person. So I think for me too, but then of course I had what I just mentioned, that really like strong drive to like not be like that. So I had to battle with myself a lot mentally to like, okay, I have this desire to live a certain way, to become this certain type of person, who lives this alternative lifestyle. But on the other hand, I had a lot of issues with like self-belief, like believe just the like basic foundational like trust that you can make shit work for you if you want in your life. So yeah, I think that took a lot of just traveling, I think was one thing that really did it for me. Like just having experiences outside of sort of the world that I grew up in. And just also just growing up. like my 20s were just about figuring out like who I was and like believing in myself and figuring out how to believe in myself. That makes sense.
Oh, 100%. It 100% makes sense, and I'm so glad that you shared that. And there was actually a couple points in there that I wanted to get to in the future, but F it, let's talk about it now. Um, I recall an interview where you were talking about you finding out like your feministic nature, right? What being a woman means to you in this world. And let's be honest, I mean, no sugarcoating. Uh, that's been, when we talk about living the creative life, and you mentioned in your statement earlier it being an alternative life. But let me ask you this: would you say that this is an alternative, or this is like a truthful way of living, being connected with who you are as a person, which, in my opinion, goes against a lot of societal norms. Like societal norms to me don't really feel natural, if you pick up what I'm
Hmm.
putting down. So
Hmm.
when we talk about the feministic side, you had mentioned in your experience recognizing a lot of misogynistic behavior as you started getting into like the bigger parts of the industry. And yeah, by all means, please go into that because I think that that is a huge, huge gap that a lot of people have to cross, especially as female artists. You had talked about the Barbie movie and a situation with Ryan Gosling and the Grammys and I Love Ken song. So yeah, if you don't mind, go ahead and expand a little more on that experience and that challenge, and let these young artists know, these young female artists know, like what it is and what it takes.
Totally. I think I have a unique perspective on that too because I was a musician before I was an author. And in fact, being an author wasn't like something that I planned. It was never like I never was a big writer as a kid. I was always a reader, like you said, but writing wasn't like on the radar. And the music world is very male centered. I had so many experiences when we were touring with my band of just like crazy like scenarios like where you're sound checking and like it was like my band was me and two other guys, and I played the keyboards, and then we had a guitarist and a drummer, and they would be like adjusting their monitor setting, and they'd be like, oh, can I get more guitar in my monitor, can I get more vocal, and they'd be like, yep, yep. And then I would speak up and be like, can I get more keyboards in my monitor, and they'd be like, it's already loud enough. And I'm like, it's not loud enough or I wouldn't have asked you. Like,
Mm,
I'm telling you to turn it up, give me, and then like I would end up with like crap sound at like all these gigs. And like after the gig, I'd be like, oh my God, worst sound ever for me on stage. And the guys would be like, what? I had great sound. What do you mean? And it's like, it was like years of that, of like me like gaslighting myself, like, oh, I must be really bad at sound checks.
mm,
Like, I
mhm,
always mess up my sound, And then I was like, oh my God, like I said, like years of this before it like slowly like pieced together in my head that like actually it's like these people aren't freaking listening to me when I'm telling them to give me more of a sound or turn something down or whatever. Versus so like that, I did that for years and I still do play music and there's a lot of really positive things. Like I'm telling you the frustrating moments. That doesn't mean it was only that.
right, right.
But when I got into like romance, the romance genre, it's like strongly female dominated. Like the whole thing is female gaze. It's like written by women, it's for women, we're all just women. Like my publishers, it's like all women. And it was like such a different experience. I still like marvel at it. Like I have to write important emails to my publisher and I'm just like, hey, how are you? And she's like, I'm great. Like it's also like chill and fun and like, and that doesn't mean that like all like, like you can't email a man and have it be fun. But like there is a certain like it's just like this feeling of like I know that like what I have to say or what um my concerns are gonna be like met and taken seriously. And it's like it was like this huge like weight like off when I became part of the industry. It was like, oh my God, it's like so easy and it makes you realize just how much like crap you have to deal with in other industries, whether they be creative or not. Like I just happen to have fallen into this like magical niche of like only women. It's kind of awesome.
Absolutely. And that last part was actually something I was thinking about, which I was debating on saying, but since you said that, yes, I notice it when I the military was a big one, especially with
I bet.
I mean, I know you're in a different country at the moment, but it gets all over the media of all the things that have happened to women in uniform in America, and yes, yes, that it is
Mhm.
everywhere, sadly. And like you also said, is that's just one side to it. There's so many, but thank you so much for sharing that because,
Mhm.
I really hope that when people do listen to this, they recognize that, hey, there is an out. It is an issue that is recognized and seen. Um, but again, you're leading by example, which is what I wanted you on this podcast for. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I think
and
too, like just like being um as women, it's like finding ways to become aware of what's happening. Because the minute you can start, like I said, I was gaslighting myself, like, oh, I just must be a really difficult person, or oh, I'm not very good at this, or oh, I must just really hate interacting with people. And then realizing, like, no, it's not in my head. And actually, it's this and this. It's really empowering. So, like, no matter what field people are in, like having that, like realizing that it's not in your head is like it makes a huge difference of how you can approach things and your confidence level too.
Absolutely. And actually to add to that, I do recall I believe at the end of your book, Sanctuary of the Shadows, which is the one I read, um, there is a biography for you, and I've heard you mention this numerous times, about the support that you have for your partner. And now I follow
Mhm.
your partner on Instagram. He is a very
Mhm.
open-minded, free-spirited seeming individual who is also an artist and lives on the ocean. Um, but when I look at that, I recognize how that is an important part of your support circle. And I've noticed that you
Mhm.
recognize that too. I don't want people to take, your experience and what you're saying and think that this is trying to be a one-sided thing. You have recognized that there's multiple pieces to it, but one thing I've noticed is some people will take a piece of a statement or an opinion, and then like that's it for everything. They kind of miss the rest of the context. So,
Mhm.
I don't think you're
Like, oh, she's a feminist, she must hate all men.
bingo.
That kind of,
Yes. So I
yeah.
wanted to make that point. Um,
Yeah, that's actually one thing I really love about the romance community is, I mean, our whole thing is reading books about people falling in love, and there's lots of different, men and women, men and another man, both women, groups of people, whatever. But as a rule, I think romance readers don't hate men because we're reading about like hot, gorgeous men falling in love. Like,
mm,
so I have tons of friends that are like super big feminists, and we could rant and joke about, shitty men all day. But at the end of the day, we also have great supportive partners, and like, we're not like misandrous. We just also recognize like, good behavior. We have standards.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad we took recognition to that. Men and women, anyone that's listening, have some standards, please.
Yeah.
That seems to be something that we've lost. And I haven't said this on my podcast yet, but my girlfriend's actually one of those. I don't talk a lot about my relationship, but yes, I find myself trying to be like a wraith. Like when I find myself losing motivation, I'm like, I need the description of this physique. Like in a way, having that, and actually, this was pretty much what I wanted to get into next,
Mhm.
on top of the world of creativity. Let's talk about like spirituality in terms of the importance of fantasy, of romance, of emotion, of these things that I feel like, for example, common society says that for a man to be a warrior, he has to come off as emotionalist, and that's like the Hollywood idea of whatever. But what's crazy to me is when you see like all of the greatest examples throughout history, whether it's Roman times or even for people that are avid readers of the Bible or Napoleon or science. I'll go into examples for forever. But I feel like any person, no matter what sexuality, who is a spiritual led human being that does make a difference and has an impact in anything, whether it's art or war or stuff, they have connection with imagination. They have connection
Mhm.
with poetry. They're artists within their own right. Um, I've talked about this previously in my podcast, so I don't have to get too deep into it. But I want you to speak on this as well, like the importance of even your genre. Like we can get into fantasy and paranormal romance, because I feel like a common person would hear that and think, oh, weird kids that live in their mom's basement. Like that's the stereotype they base off of it. So talk about the true impact that this has both on you as the creator and the community that you've built, that you became a part of. Like, I would love to hear so much more about that. So please go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, so imagination, fantasy, like, and we were talking about also, you mentioned like what we think of as a warrior. And to tie that into what we were just talking about, actually, I had a thought like, I think a lot society tells like men a lot of times that like we want a warrior is like strong, emotionless. He's like hard in every way. And one of the things I love about storytelling in the romance genre is we have so many male characters like that. Like Wraith is one in Sanctuary of the Shadow. But what happens is throughout the course of the story, he like learns that he doesn't have to be that way, and he actually is quite a soft, vulnerable person. And it's all about him finding like a safe space where he can not be that way anymore. And maybe that's how he has to appear to the outside world because of, circumstances that have shaped him that way. But in reality, he's like has a lot of emotions and he has to learn throughout the story to express them. And I feel like that's such a positive, like both men and women can benefit from that. Women,
Yes.
we maybe have a different set of stereotypes, whether it's like, oh, we're supposed to become mothers and wives and nurturing figures, or even now the modern woman is supposed to be this hard CEO boss bitch, and some women don't want that. They don't want that archetype either. They want to be soft and nurturing. So it's like these types of stories are showing people that like we can transcend those kinds of, yeah, like forced roles that we're kind of told that we need to become. And I
Yes,
think
completely
storytelling is like
unnatural.
such a safe avenue to like explore that, because you're just in your head and it's just you and your thoughts, and the story's suggesting things to you, and you can say, I don't like that idea, or like, oh, I'm super into that. And if you don't like something, there's always 10 other things of something that you do like once you dive in, it's just like there's everything you could ever want.
Yes, absolutely. And in my opinion, this is one of those few opinions where I would say is more of a fact, that does greater work for the benefit of people's lives, like real lives, than any politician or business or
Mhm.
whatever the hell you want to call it. Because to me, that is the most realistic form of life. And
Mhm.
that's, if you hear my opening where I say, where we're all about perception, like to me, that's what it means to live, is you the moment we are born into this universe, we are into this big, infinitely complex range of emotions and ideas and things we will never, like, you can't put these under a microscope and study it. They're not
Mhm.
physical beings, but it's the truth. So it's almost like we're living in this world of magic, right? And
Mhm.
so many people, staying on the society topic, try to, denote that with titles and words or whatever. And it's sad. Like, I feel like we have a bunch of just dead souls walking around, and those are typically the ones that, what I'm saying is, what's normal is not normal. And I would love to
Mhm.
see what you just described and what you're doing with your art and with your work. That's normal. And that needs to be
Mhm.
normalized.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
that does lead me to my next question, actually, is, while we're recognizing this infinite world of possibilities, do you ever, this is a more personal question, pertaining to you and how you perform your art. I've heard you talk about how you have your ritual and your expensive coffee machine, your coffee guru, and you work better at night. Again, all this information people can find. Um, but do you ever get overwhelmed with, like, do you ever get senses of anxiety? Or I know sometimes you can get so overwhelmed with all the thoughts and stuff that you have that you end up doing nothing. Like, there's like a freeze. Does the infinite world of creativity and the endlessness of life ever kind of get to you in a way where you're like, okay, I need to sit down for a second and recuperate?
Hmm. Totally. That's definitely happened to me a lot of times throughout my creative history. Like I've had like lifelong on and off experiences with burnout, creative burnout. So I started out, you mentioned that I grew up playing classical music, and I was like one of those hardcore like kids, I practiced 2 hours a day. Like I was like obsessed with it. I was like going to the little competitions and like, it was like a big deal. And then when I got to, I think I was like 13 or 14, I just like reached my like limit and was just like, no. And I was like months away from doing this super huge exam. It was like the final exam of the Royal Conservatory, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And I just quit everything and I didn't touch a piano for like 5 years. And I like hated the sight of it. It was like literally like PTSD. Like, like, I mean, I shouldn't say that because like you're like literally in the army, and I'm like I played classical
Oh no,
music,
it's listen, it's
but I was like it
overrated.
was a form of trauma, like even if it was on a lesser level. So yeah, and it took me a long time, like 5 years, before I was willing to like approach the instrument again and like sort of reconsider my relationship with it. And yeah, I've experienced that with writing as well. For the writing, it was when I first started writing, it was my secret thing. I had a lot of other creative projects going on, and I had just randomly decided I was going to write a book, and I didn't tell anyone. And I didn't even tell my husband. Like, he was like, "What are you working on?" I'd like slam the computer closed and be like, "Nothing."
I love that.
He's like, "Okay." And then like it was like months before I was like, "Well, actually, I'm writing something," and he was like, "Oh, great." And I was like, "Don't ask." Like, and he's like, he like knows not to cry at all because I'm so secretive. Like, anyway, so eventually, after a couple of years of doing that, I shared my book with people and decided to publish. Um, and it was like it totally shifted my like how I felt about it, how I approached the craft. Because suddenly, like when you write something, any creative thing, but when you create something for just yourself, you're like, oops, it's stupid, or like, oops, it's bad, whatever. And then, oh, it turned out amazing, sweet, that's a win. But like it has to turn out stupid sometimes because then you fix it and make it amazing. Like that's just part of the process of any creating anything. But
Absolutely.
once it was like out in the public eye, it was like this feeling of everything has to be amazing right away. And if I like started creating something that I was like, this is kind of iffy, or I'm not sure that this is the thing, it was like this like stop block. And so yeah, it took, I don't know, I'm still working through that. But it's like you have to reframe. It's like you almost have to like put up some kind of like shield around yourself when you go to work. It's like, okay, and this is what I do. I like trick myself. I'm like, I'm gonna write the crappiest garbage, and just it's gonna be so bad. And then I'll write that, and I'll be like, ha ha, this is garbage. And then I go back and read it, and I'm like, oh, it's great. Like it's always great. Like I'm fine with it. I'll just tweak a little bit, and it's fine. But it's just that there's just that little. It's like the perfectionist hyper analysis that I don't know. I have that. Not maybe not everyone does, but it's kind of like this constant thing that I have to work with.
Yeah, so you actually answered like my next two questions
Oh,
in that, because I was actually going to ask about um, how your aspect, like, and how you approached art changed when it did become a thing of business, which you hit that
mhm.
nail on the head perfectly.
Yeah.
Um, and I was also going to ask, I'll hold off on, I'll refrain from on this one from now, because in one episode you did explain when you did start to publish and kind of the hard eggs and the pros and cons. One of them was called, was it Chad and Indie or?
Brad, like traditional
Oh,
publishing
okay,
versus
Chad.
independent. Yeah.
But before we get into that, you made me think of another question I would love to hear from you. We have a little under 10 minutes left. Um, you had mentioned like I love that story that you told. I actually wrote that down, how you're gonna write the crappiest chapter and to trick your brain. I love
Hmm.
when you bring that up because it makes me think of when I was on the competitive dance team and I was always embarrassed. I hated performing. I never felt good enough. And there were always like the professional choreographers. Like you said, this isn't any art. And it's amazing. You mentioned in one podcast how every art you realize at a certain point is kind of connected. And
Hmm.
like, it's amazing how the universe is. It's like, wow, how could they be connected? Well, you kind of feel it, but we don't know how. Um, but yeah, tell me more about that for any artist and even for the common person, because the common person looks at artists and they're like, oh, they're cringy, oh, they're weird, oh, this is weird. But that's the nature of art, and a lot of artists, whether it's writers or dancers or whatever, it's We also get in our own heads, absolutely. But please dive a little more into that and tell me like how things have gotten better throughout time, how things have kind of shifted, maybe history repeated itself. But yeah, how does
Mhm.
one overcome this feeling of cringe and this isn't good or whatever, both in the creative world and when it starts to become a business?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think first of all is like recognizing that feeling that you're talking about is like a shame, sort of. And it's like if you think of it as like Catholic shame or something, like we're all part of this kind of Eurocentric culture that was founded on this kind of fucked up religion. No offense to any Catholic listeners out there.
We'll just say
And
we're
so I
speaking on
feel
the
like
history of the corruption of the church. Everybody knows about it.
basically, so like we're kind of ingrained from a young age through like whatever various medias to
Yes.
feel like ashamed of our like urges that maybe go against what we consider normal. And as you said earlier, what we think is normal is probably actually really weird. So I think a lot that's the beauty of art is we should be able to explore our weird ideas and fantasies in a shame-free environment where there's no one going like, ew, you like that? Or like, ew, that's so cringy, like you said, or just whatever. And I think I love another thing going back to what I love about the romance genre is like it being a female gaze centered niche. It faces a lot of that from the outside world. Like the publishing world doesn't has not in the past. It's changing now, which is awesome, but has not in the past taken the genre very seriously. It tends to be dismissive. Like, oh, that's just like women. There's a whole genre called chick lit, and you're like, where's the like boy lit genre? It's just it's
Yes. Yeah.
very weird, and judgy kind of. But then there's like it's like that with any art, like people pick something and say that's awkward and that's cringy and that's shitty. And the beauty of it is that it's like you have to learn either as someone who appreciates that art and loves it or someone who creates the art on another level. You just have to learn that that kind of shame is just totally a useless emotion. Like it's completely, not only is it useless, it's like detrimental. Like if you allow
Yes.
that to express itself, it will totally just stifle you, completely stifle you. Like the first time I wrote a sex scene, like I was like alone, no, like I was like alone in the house, and I was like I was so embarrassed. Like I felt like I was gonna like melt, and like I like couldn't do it. Like I was so embarrassed. And now I look back on that sex scene and it was like the most like vanilla shit like I've ever. It was like, wow, like that's so risque. Like so you just get used to it. It's a process,
It's
and you
crazy
expose
how when you
yourself.
mention that. Now, the sexing thing, that's smut, right? That's when it's considered smut. Am I getting
Yeah.
it?
So smut, side note, is originally like a derogatory term that was speaking of
Oh,
the like sort of this sort of slander that the romance world has received. Originally, that term was used as a way to like dismiss, like, oh, it's just smut, But we've kind of reclaimed the term now, and we're like, it's smut, like, like so.
noticed.
Yeah, so like you can go ahead and say that. You just have to know that when you're saying it, that it's like it's almost a joke. You know what I
Okay.
mean? Like it's kind of like it's smutty, like just. But then I always avoid the term if I'm talking to someone like that because they would use that as a way to like justify, like if you're like, yeah, it's smutty, they'll be like, oh, like I would
Very
say like it has
interesting.
love scenes, explicit love scenes if I'm like educating someone, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
what you're saying actually makes me think how it's so crazy. This is what my mind said when you were finishing this up. It's amazing how we have to relearn how to be natural human beings because
Hmm.
like our sexual nature is more normal than a day job. Like we're born with it. It's part of us. We
Hmm.
die with it. Not the jobs. Not like none.
Totally.
So yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. And by the way, you have done amazing. Actually, we're coming up at the end.
So,
So I mean, I'm just gonna say thank you so much for sharing that. I would like to end it like this. Because I mean, listen, first, this is not the last interview you're gonna do. I can tell. And when we Google your name, we see New York Times bestseller. But talking to you, following you, and I am gonna join your Patreon. I'm just really new to this community, but it's like I feel like you're on the rise. Like some people will say, "Oh, she's made it," but no, you're like just getting started. So
Mhm.
please close us out saying anything you want to say, whether it's about your Hellbent series, your music, any final thoughts. Somebody has already asked you like what you would give advice to authors and young women, that stuff they can find. So please close us out however you'd like. Make any notes, and then we're gonna go ahead and call this one.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would just finish by just like spreading some hype for my series that's coming out next year. I wrote that, speaking of things that were written for the pure enjoyment and no shame or fear or whatever, I wrote that because I was like, I want to write a book that takes zero research and is only about things that I'm interested in. So I made a list of things that I could write about that either knew about already or was really into, and those was a kind of like the most fun possible way to write a book. So I made it about music because I'm a musician and I'm a piano player. So I made the male main character a piano player. I set it in Montreal because I was living there at the time. I lived there for 10 years. So I knew the city super well. And I made it a paranormal because that was my first favorite romance genre. That's what got me into reading romance. And then I also made kind of a play on the Christian thing because I was raised not like in a super culty Christian thing, but I was raised, my parents went to church and I actually had a job as a pipe organist for a while. So I know all the weird Bible shit. So I
Yes,
was like, well, I'm just gonna put this, I'm just gonna put it all into a book and just go with it. So anyway, I found like just like that book, it feels even just like thinking about that book is cathartic. It's just such a fun expression for me. It's like just pure fun, and I'm just really excited that it's coming out again. I released it as an independent book, and then it got signed with the publisher, so now they're like re-releasing it, and it's gonna go like be in bookstores and be way more of a big deal. So I'm pretty excited.
understood. I mean, well, that is definitely something to look into. I don't. I think it's a little more on the rare occasion for an author who has, had success in an industry to go back and say, I want to make something that has to do with what I'm and what I have connected with. That is beautiful. I'm glad I got that news. So that is
Yeah,
amazing. And I will post links to like your series, your Patreon, all the stuff that you share. Um, Aurora, thank you. I'm so glad you came on. This was everything I wanted it to be. And I think you are doing great. You're going to do great. And I would highly recommend anybody, side note, to follow your social media, to follow your husband's social media, by the way, Orion's. I know he wasn't like a part of this podcast, but I'm gonna tag him because it's like seeing something that he posted or you posted in him. It's like I don't care for any of his content like personally, but I care for his content because of just the person that he is. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
we need more of that. So
yeah.
you guys keep rocking, and I'm
Thanks.
gonna go ahead and end this recording. That's it for this episode. Thank you.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was good. It was
Yes,
a good
ma'am.
conversation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, ETVT